Here we go. Yes. So, hey everyone, welcome. I am so sorry I didn't hit the live button. My bad. Dan and I were talking and it was quite exciting. Dan, we've already solved all the problems of the world in 5 minutes, right?
Right.
Well, so thank you guys for being such a great audience. You were already answering questions like, where are you at? Where are you coming in from? We've got Mexico, Utah, Florida. We had New Jersey, I saw in there, Louisiana. I'm Lindsay Wood, also a speaker support here within Tiny House Conference. And I am honored to be here with Dan Fitzpatrick, who will give a deeper conversation or introduction to himself. However, I'll share with you the one thing I'm really grateful about working here with Dan is that he knows how to talk to government officials. And that is a strong benefit in an industry that really relies on being able to communicate about this tiny house movement, tiny home movement, to city officials and elected officials that can truly make a difference in providing a whole different level of housing. I call it fast, affordable housing. Nick was just actually sharing that in the city of San Jose, I think it was a matter of months, or no, weeks or months, very short time, very little dollars, when a family had been waiting for 2 years to get an ADU permit, and they're literally their family members about to move into a matter of days. That's the difference and the impact that can be made. And so now I want to turn it over to Dan for you to introduce yourself. And we do have a presentation, Dan, so you let me know when you're ready to run that, and I'll take it away.
Okay, I'm Dan Fitzpatrick and president of the Tiny Home Industry Association. And Lindsay and I have been doing dog and pony shows around the country and on Zoom for the past year and getting pretty good at it. We're reading each other's minds now. My background is sort of half and half in government and half in the private sector. I spent 30 years in local government, principally as a city manager, county administrator, including a stint as the assistant city manager of Las Vegas and county administrator here in Fresno, California. So I've got 30 years doing that, and then another 30 years doing private development all over principally California, and do real estate investment to this point in time. So I've enjoyed working with local governments and talking to local government officials about changing their ordinances to be tiny friendly. And one thing we find in this industry that we certainly have barriers to legalizing tiny homes in our various communities, principally building codes and zoning codes, which are controlled to a great extent at local government level. So I'm trying to do programs on Zoom and at Tiny Fest to try to teach folks on how to be their own advocates in their own backyards and their own communities, so that slowly but surely we can add to the list of communities that are tiny friendly around the United States. So what we put together is basically 25 slides, which is sort of a sampling of the types of slides I use and have used successfully to change laws in a number of cities. Certainly, we now have allow movable tiny houses as accessory dwelling units in San Diego, Los Angeles, San Jose, working on Oakland, getting real close with Oakland, Santa Clara County, Humboldt County, City of Fresno, and the City of San Luis Obispo. And we were able to recently change some state laws up in Maine and have several others pending, trying to do some things in Florida. So a great deal is happening through the Tiny Home Industry Association. And maybe let's go through the slides, and I'll give you a sort of an overview of the types of things I've used to talk to city council members and presentations to staff and community groups. So
all right, share the screen. 1 second. Oops. Okay, do you see the screen?
Yep.
Great.
And as I said, this is a presentation on legalizing tiny homes. And I go through a number of different aspects of tiny homes and tiny home industry and locating tiny homes. And I've been doing this for the past little over 5 years. I think I got the Fresno ordinance passed. I think it was 5 years ago now. I'm dating myself. I'm getting old now. Next slide. One of the things I like to point about, again, being one of the old timers here, is that back in the 1950s, when I was growing up as a kid, the average size of a home was 1,000 square feet. And today, in 2020, it's over 2,000 square feet is the average size. Back in the 1950s, those were families with mom and dad and 3 kids, and usually only 1 bathroom. If you think about it, that's about the average square foot for 1 or 2 people in a tiny house. So I call it back to the future. We're basically going back to the way we used to live back in the the average size homes, smaller homes in the 1950s. But at the same time, the average size of the houses of going up, the average size of families has gone down. Over 30% of the U.S. housing units now are single occupied units versus 8% when I was a kid. So today's households are more diverse, and a mix of housing is needed to meet those demographic changes. Next slide. So who's buying tiny homes? And first of all, it's not just millennials. A lot of folks think, oh, this is millennials. This is basically my kids, those in their 30s that are buying tiny homes. No. The majority of movable tiny houses to date have been bought by us baby boomers. And I think that will change, though, as more and more banks and finance companies come online that are willing to finance movable tiny houses to put them within a price range, monthly payments that millennials can afford. More women than men buy tiny houses, which is interesting. And also what's happening too is not just the demographics we talked about earlier, is that, and certainly was accelerated by our current recent pandemic, is we have a mobile lifestyle. You don't have to go into work, into an office to do your work. You can do it on the go. All you need is Wi-Fi. You can be sitting in Kansas and doing work for a company in San Francisco. Plus, there are a number of professions that are mobile, where you're only spending a year or 2 in one place and you move. Traveling nurses is a good example. Even professors, associate professors, teachers at community colleges and the like, especially in some of the rural states, they pick up and move every 6 months to go teach English lit at another school, in a town 100 miles away. So lifestyles are changing. What's important is, and I hear this a lot from elected officials, oh, this tiny house thing is just a fad. No, it's not a fad. Look at the demographics. The demographics are growing. Us baby boomers, the kids have left the house. We're rolling around in homes that are much bigger than we need, and we want to downsize. Our kids are getting married at a later date, having less, children, and so the need for studio apartments, single bedroom units is at an all-time high. But unfortunately, all we're turning out is McMansions, and that needs to change. Next slide.
And actually, Dan, to add to this, I had texted you earlier about Jody Gable, who was on earlier, really did a great presentation around legalities and contracts and all that. But she was really talking about the end of this whole what do you call it? COVID, and what do you call it? That eviction ban. And then when the eviction ban releases, oh boy, there's the trifecta of the affordable housing crisis that already existed, the pandemic crisis, and even natural disaster crisis in specific areas. So this all points to not being a fad. Yeah.
Right. And, just also on that point is certainly here in California, but many other states have the same thing. We're not only going through a COVID pandemic crisis, many of our metropolitan areas have an affordability crisis. Many of our states have a natural disaster crisis, everything from hurricanes to earthquakes to tornadoes, and let alone the fire, situation. And a number of communities, like where Lindsay lives, have all 3 or 4 going at the same time. So having tiny homes and movable tiny houses as part of the mix of housing options is just very important. It is growing in leaps and bounds. Next. Anyway, one of the things I try to talk to city officials about is, first of all, simple. What is a tiny house? Well, the good news is we do have a legal definition now in the International Residential Code that defines a tiny house as being less than 400 square feet. And certainly your movable tiny homes are less than 400 square feet, and a number of foundation-based tiny homes are under 400 square feet and meet certain requirements of new building codes. And some enterprising entrepreneurs have created stackable units, efficiency apartments and units that can be in high-rise configurations, and we see them going up in metropolitan areas all over the country. Next. I also try to explain to my municipal government officials what are the benefits of tiny homes, and the benefits are not just to the user, those of you that want to live in tiny homes, but there's also significant benefits to the community. One, they're affordable. Communities around the country desperately need affordable housing, workforce housing. I mean, teachers can't afford to live in many of the communities they teach, let alone the clerk at the Walmart store certainly can't afford, average rents. They're energy efficient. They reduce the carbon footprint. They certainly are low in water and sewer consumption and sustainable. And that's very important to a lot of communities here in California as elsewhere. We've had droughts, and having lower water consumption is a major priority of many communities around the country. Next slide. They are also very easy to locate, hook up, and maintain. The example that Lindsay mentioned earlier, that unit in San Jose here, the average time to build a unit to put in your backyard is over 2 years. Versus you can go down to the factory and say, I want that tiny house, and have it brought in, wheeled into your backyard, put on a pad, and all done in under 100 days. And it's very quick and affordable. Also, it's important that these tiny homes don't take up much land, so they're great for increased density, for infill in urban, areas. So you can accommodate more folks without rape and pillaging the countryside. That you do it without, sprawl. It's also a better use of community resources. And that was very important to me as a city manager, is I can get increased density. If I put an accessory dwelling unit, a tiny house in a backyard, well, there's already water and sewer in the streets. I don't have to build more of it. There's streets. I don't have to build another street. There's already police and fire stations serving that community. So it's certainly a benefit to the community. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. There's no taxpayer subsidy required for affordable units. And that's a big, big item. Next.
Yeah, that was a big one for me. So I look forward to diving into that further.
So there's a number of issues that we have to talk to our community members about. Certainly the stickiest one is building codes. And we have two types of tiny homes. Certainly your stick-built tiny homes, those that are on foundations, and movable tiny houses. And here's an examples of both. And one is a tiny home that just happens to be very nicely situated, and you can't tell that it's a movable tiny house because of the way they've screened it. Next item. The building codes for stick-built houses, the ones on foundations, have evolved. One thing we have as an industry association worked very closely with folks to change the International Residential Code in 2018. That includes now an Appendix Q that is very specifically geared towards tiny homes. It now legalizes sleeping lofts, the stairways and the ladders to your sleeping lofts, headrooms and space requirements for each individual room. So tiny house building construction has now been legalized. And slowly but surely, state after state around the country has adopted the 2018 International Residential Code and have adopted Appendix Q. Some states have done it that it's mandatory throughout all communities in the states, and some of them leave it up to their local government to determine whether or not they want to also approve Appendix Q. So depending on where you live, you need to do a little research to find out if you want to do a tiny house in the backyard on a foundation. Do you have building codes that are up to date that includes building tiny? If not, on your plans, don't call them sleeping lofts, call them a storage space, and you can do the same thing. But anyway, I didn't tell you that. Next item. So what's a movable tiny house? Now, this is a series of slides I've used, and many of these I used, for example, in a presentation I gave to the City Council and the City of San Diego. I find some really good pictures of tiny homes to show them, and let's go through these. Next item is movable tiny houses are not your conventional travel motorhome, fifth wheel trailer, or pop-up trailer. These are not it. They are tiny homes. Next slide. Movable tiny houses are built to resemble a typical cottage or bungalow. They're just a tiny, typical tiny house. They just happen to be built on a chassis with wheels. Now, when you site them and put a little deck around them and some screening, and they certainly blend in and fit very well within the community. And here are some very good examples of movable tiny houses that have been built and sited around the country. The one to the left is the one that helped us get approved an ordinance in the city of Fresno. That's one that Nick built, California Tiny House, and that's sitting out in front of City Hall of the city of Fresno. And during the day, we had a couple thousand city of Fresno employees and public take a tour of it, including the mayor, went up into the loft. So it was pretty easy to get the approval for tiny houses in Fresno. Next item.
Well, wait, Dan, how long did it take you to get the approval for Fresno?
24 hours.
Yeah.
But then again, I used to be the county administrator here, so it was pretty easy. But part of it, and I can't stress this enough, especially for those of you that are builders, get your mayors and your city council members out to your factories, get them out to your shops. You can't get, anyone that's been in these units and see how they're built and see that they're built just like any other house. And everyone falls in love with them. Get them out, get them into these units, and then say, it's too bad you don't allow these in your community. Most of them are, sort of flummoxed that they didn't realize their ordinance that don't allow it. And so, use that. Get them out. There's nothing better than kicking the wheel, so to speak, touching and feeling a tiny house, that they're not a typical RV. Next item. Well, let's back up one more. Is that the I show this picture that they're built like a conventional house, but on wheels. And I point out that, this typical 2x4 construction, the banding, the house wraps, the siding, everything is built just like a conventional tiny house. Just happened to be on those pesky wheels. Next item. And the designs can aesthetically fit the community. So, if you're building in a rural, rustic area, you have a different feel versus, let's say, an inner city historic area. You just change the siding. It can be the same tiny house. You're just putting on different siding to fit, that the design fits nicely into the community where you're going to locate your unit. Very flexible. Next item. The interiors are, made for independent, habitable daily living, for living, sleeping, cooking, sanitation, work, and recreation. And those are key words. Sleeping, cooking, and sanitation are in almost the definition of a habitable dwelling unit in all 50 states. So you've got to be able to show any ordinance that you want them to agree that this is a habitable unit. You need to be able to show that it is for living, sleeping, cooking, and sanitation, that all of those criteria for a habitable unit are met. And certainly tiny homes do that. Next item. Builders of movable tiny houses also are certified through third-party organizations that provide oversight in conformance with the standards. And that's very important. Any of you that are building yourself or working with a builder, make sure that your unit is certified through an independent third-party firm. I can't stress that enough. No municipality that I've ever worked with will let a unit in their city that doesn't have a certification sticker on it. And you think about it, again, having been a city manager, I don't want to put my name that I permitted you to put a unit on it, and I have no certification to show that minimal building requirements, especially fire, plumbing, electrical, have been met. Because if there's a problem, guess who gets sued? Not you, the city will. So it's very important to make sure you get your unit certified. Next item. Now, these are my favorite two slides that we toggle back and forth on. The current building codes, the cottages below, may very well be considered a permitted dwelling unit. And I point out, aren't these beautiful units? Wouldn't you like to have these in your community? They fit really neat in your backyard. There's a little infill development. Then I go to the next slide. Next slide says, but these cottages are not permitted. See, they're on those pesky wheels. And so I go, there's a legal, not legal, legal, not legal. It's those pesky wheels. And it's the same thing, but it's a difference without substance is the point I like to make. Is there's absolutely no reason why one should not be able to locate these units within your community, because they're exactly the same as any other tiny house. They just happen to be on wheels. Next item. So you need to do code amendments in your local ordinances that define movable tiny houses and establish what the building code standards are. And by that I mean, in a municipal code, there's always usually like 20 pages of definitions. And there's usually a definition in those codes of, for example, a recreational vehicle, an RV. Well, right now, that code, that definition would include our movable tiny houses. So you need a definition that differentiates this from a conventional recreational vehicle. So what we call it a movable tiny house definition. And that's important. Next item. And one of the key criteria in that definition is to incorporate some basic design guidelines to separate it from a typical or conventional RV, that you incorporate into the design features materials typically used for housing, such as siding and roofing materials, pitched roofs, eaves, residential type structure. One municipality did a little diagram. It's in the lower left-hand corner. They literally put in their ordinance. They have a little picture. The one on the left is okay. The one on the right is not okay. It was very simple. Versus LA, put a whole page of design criteria in there to define the difference between a conventional RV and a movable tiny house. But that's very important, because the last thing a city wants to approve is allowing a conventional RV to be considered a tiny house in their community. That will kill you. You need to put in design criteria that says it looks like a tiny house and is built like a tiny house, not a conventional RV. Next item. Then we need to also, besides building codes, we need to update and take a look at the land use and zoning codes. Many times in your zoning codes that there's not only minimum lot size, that you have to have an 8,000 square foot lot or a 5,000 square foot lot or a 10,000 square foot lot, which quite frankly a little tiny house would get lost on. Many times there's also a requirement that the unit, the size of the house, has to be a certain size. Most places are usually not, has to be greater than 700 square feet. A number of them are 1,000 square feet or more in terms of the minimum size for a house. So many times you need to take a look at the codes to make sure that they become tiny house friendly. Many communities, unlike communities in California that are all required to permit accessory dwelling units, most of you in the other states have a two-step process. If you want to have a tiny house or a movable tiny house in the backyard, you need to be able to handle the dwelling units in such a way that they meet the various requirements. For example, you have many times hookup fees and other types of fees for your house that are for a typical 2,000 square foot house, but they're for now your 300 square foot house. That's ridiculous. Many times the building and zoning codes require fees of like $10,000 to hook up to the sewer. And that may be, worthwhile for a 3-bedroom, 2,200 square foot house with 3 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms, etc. But certainly not a movable tiny house. That makes no sense. So you got to look at the various code types of things that become an impediment to development of tiny houses. Next item. And accessory dwelling units we've talked about. They're granny flats units in the backyard, and they're usually hooked up to the main house utilities, and they're usually designed to, complement, the neighborhood. They mainly look like or in keeping with the main house. And these are, we've been able to very significantly get these approved in the bigger cities here in California, because they're so perfect for meeting the needs of affordable housing in our housing challenged neighborhoods. Next item. Also, tiny houses can be used on residential lots, and you can do some design guidelines for, especially they're perfect for these remnant parcels, little parcels that you find all over cities where you can't fit a conventional house. It just doesn't work, but they're perfect to put a couple tiny houses on it. And if designed right and laid out right, they're just a perfect little fit for the community and provide options for folks for, housing. Next item. You can refine the small lot subdivisions to be inclusive of tiny houses on foundations. Again, this goes, I call it back to the future again. Again, when I was growing up, many cities had bungalow courts or cottage clusters that were, and many of you, if you drive around your metropolitan areas, you'll still find these things that were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s of units. Well, many cities are allowing one to go back to that by changing many times their PUD laws or planned unit development laws to allow tiny houses to be clustered around a courtyard or a garden or a community center or all of the above to be infill projects. They're perfect on 1 to 5 acre, parcels in the inner city, let alone in rural areas. Next item. And tiny homes, as we talked about, are great for planned unit development. I'm working with a number of folks in several cities on amending their planned unit development ordinance to allow for movable tiny houses and tiny houses to be developed in cottage clusters, and with some criteria for how they're laid out, open space, community center facilities, and hooking up to the water, sewer, and electric facilities of the municipality. Again, they're great for infill remnant parcels, and many times I try to work with a local government if they want to try out this concept. I say, well, let's find a piece of property that would be perfect for this, that's not going to get the neighbors upset, and let's create a little model community. And if it works out, now people have something they can come and see how it works out, and then we can move it around and use it in other sections of the community. Next item. Also, tiny houses as resorts. This is becoming more and more popular around the country, and they've become very popular since the pandemic. People aren't going out to hotels and motels. They want their own separate standalone unit. And so the Airbnb market for tiny houses in a resort type setting have been doing extremely well. And so if you have a community that's located, near some attraction like the coast or the mountains or a national park or lakes and so forth, this is perfect for not only resorts and for tiny house living, but it's also a little money maker for the community. These are great just off of a downtown that needs additional business. You put some of these in, well, people walk down to the local coffee shop and buy at the local, stores. They're perfect to help the community and work with your local chamber of commerces to get it done. Next item.
Actually, Dan, I want to point out, so this picture is of We Casa in Lyons, Colorado. And they are one of our sponsors. They're offering a 5-night giveaway, a try before you buy. We're going to be talking to more tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. Yours truly will be talking about what you got to do to enter to win. And then we'll be giving it away on Sunday, that 5 night. So this is very exciting. Definitely a great sponsor to be able to give some love back to the community and a place for you guys to check out tiny homes.
Great. And so we can answer any questions, and do we have where's our little plug?
There we go. Okay. So joining Thea. So if you guys haven't been familiar, someone mentioned there's the RVIA, and a lot of people know that as a sticker on the side of an RV. They even think that is the certification. That is the RV Industry Association. We are the Tiny Home Industry Association, just to draw some comparison. And wonderful to have you guys join us as members. There's membership for $25 for individual. These are all yearly, $50 nonprofit, $100 for commercial. And for that, offer of your investment, we go out and help legalize in areas like you just saw the long list. If you were here for Alexis's presentation, all over California, Dan's mentioned that a number of places all over the country is working with municipalities and counties, state level, to actually get legalizing tiny homes. And so to answer questions as city officials, so that access to the training libraries available, the 3-part legalized tiny home advocacy training, and much, much more. Each one of the individual memberships have a different benefit. So that's the link, and I'll drop it in the comments. And I do want to invite you all to, never been done before, a Thea open house with Dan Fitzpatrick, Alexis Stevens, Zach Giffen. He'll be talking tomorrow. Nick will be speaking a little bit later. You may have seen him come in on my cell phone and myself. We'll be doing speed round discussions for 1 hour about design, advocacy, DIY financing. And to learn more about the open house, sign up, go to Experience Tiny Homes. There's just scroll down and do that. So I will send the links in here, and now we will open up for questions. I know there's been a lot of questions so far, so if you guys have a question that wasn't answered before, because the chat can be pretty long. There's 215 people in the room. I want to give a shout out to Zach and Jason for getting 1,700 people to sign up for this conference all over the world. Now, I know that our presentation was very US focused. Obviously, I should say US and Canada. We do have the Canadian Alliance coming up on Sunday to talk. But yeah, so let's check out your questions. Hooking up to well and septic. Dan, that was a question. I'm imagining, so there are utilities that you do have to hook up to. What have you commonly seen of the cities that have said yes? Is it well, septic, electrical? What's the scoop there?
Well, a good example is, let me tell you about Humboldt County, which is on the coast here in California. It's a very rural county, and it's known throughout the world as the cannabis capital of the world. Their ordinance basically says is if you have a tiny house and it's in an area where there's municipal water and sewer, you got to hook up to the municipal water and sewer system. If you're in a rural area, you have to, it's treated just like any other house. You have to hook into a septic system and hook into a well that you have water or some kind of a water system. And normally you have to go get approvals for them from the county, usually the county health department. Going back to, remember our definition of a habitable unit, it's always, sanitation is one of the key criteria that you need to work with your local governments on, is making sure you're hooked into a potable water system and that your sanitation is properly disposed of. They do not want it to be running down the street. This is not a third world country.
And Nick is in the house. Thank you, Nick, for answering some of the questions, because there's a lot that people have. But let's see. The open house. I'll put in the link. That's my website for the open house. I'll actually just show you guys really quick on share screen, because we're gonna have a lot more questions. We only have like 15 more minutes. And then we have Ben Garrett from Canada doing Tiny Healthy Homes coming on the screen. So let's go back to something asked about composting. Dan, you fielded that question before.
Yeah, well, composting may or may not be acceptable in your local government communities. Normally, you're going to be required to get a permit from the local health department for a composting toilet. In some cases, I know folks in some of the backyards here in California, they just hook into the water and sewer system, and if at a later date they want to take out a conventional toilet and put it in a compost toilet, no one's going to come and check on it. But with that said, is composting toilets may or may not be acceptable depending on the local government and the inspections that they do.
Okay, and then there was a question about New Jersey. Thinking anyone across the country, hearing what you're sharing, and I kind of know the answer to this because we have already recorded a 3-part advocacy training. So if you, for $25, sign up for the Tiny Home Industry Association, you will get that 3-part training. It was with myself. Sorry, it was Dan's training with Alexis and myself in support of Dan, and that has a lot of information in it. Very much what we talked about today, going a little bit deeper into that cottage housing, village house, tiny home villages, all of that. So that would be a really good place as a resource to sign up for, because that had I think we did 3 45-minute sessions. And the most recent one There's a question in here from San Diego, or about San Diego, which it is now legal to have tiny homes on wheels, or I think they're called movable tiny homes, in San Diego backyards.
Right.
Is that correct, Dan? It's current?
Right. And I have been working with some folks in New Jersey, different communities. I'm born and raised in New Jersey. I know Jersey real well. My accent comes back every once in a while. So, and there's a lot of different communities in everything from the Pine Barrens to the coast to the metropolitan areas in New Jersey. So, be happy to work with anyone that's interested in New Jersey.
Yeah, we had someone from South New Jersey.
Yeah, that's really down in the Pine Barrens.
It all comes back to, if you go into that advocacy training, because it's a lot to get involved. It goes a little bit deeper than even this presentation as to some of the things that you need to get prepared for in your research and in all of that. So that training, I mean, we could have done that training here, but this kind of was a much bigger overview of what Dan provides. But that one goes deeper in. That's part one of this series. So highly recommended, because it really, Dan, give us a snapshot of what that training's all about on the first 45-minute one.
Well, we have two parts. The first one is basically training you on how to do the research necessary to be able to approach your local government, officials. I noticed one of the questions here was, I can't even get a return phone call from my code enforcement officer. Well, if the staff won't talk to you, go to a council member. Go to a mayor's re-election beer party. Wear your mask, but go introduce yourself to some local government officials. They make policy. Staff doesn't make policy. I'll give you a good example. The staff in San Diego did not want movable tiny houses as ADUs. So I gave up on staff and I gave a presentation to the City Council of San Diego. They unanimously told the staff to write the ordinance and bring it back to them in 6 months. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, so to speak. And that's part of the training program, is how to build coalitions, how to talk to local government officials, staff, how to research and find out people that are interested. And the second series is a series of 57 slides, and you can have the slides as part of the program as slides I've used for various presentations, and you mix and match the slides depending on who you're giving a presentation to. There are certain slides that we've used today that are perfect for local government elected officials at a council meeting when they only have 10 or 15 minutes, versus something where you're giving to a city staff meeting that includes, planners, zoning officials, building and code officials that may need to be a little bit more detailed. So that second presentation gives you a total overview of all the slides that I've used that then are available to you to put a presentation together. There are 89,000 communities in the United States. Dan Fitzpatrick cannot talk to all 89,000 of them. I need a ton more of folks to get trained, to be able to go out and talk to folks. And I'll be happy to help you out, working with you on finalizing those items, but you're the one that has to make the initial contacts.
Yeah, it'd be really ideal. There's the research. Sign up for Tiny Home Industry Association. This is what you do. You click on members, and then you go here, scroll down, you choose whichever membership. I don't individual. We got to fix that. We need to fix. Okay. So I think I'm just going to click on, no, that's, ew. Okay, we got a little glitch. Thank you. We will look into figuring that out. I don't see the individual one there. So,
and also what happens is after you sign up and become a member, you get a letter from Lindsay that will have in the email, direct links to the training program. So that you don't have to even hunt for it. She'll send it to you.
And here's what I was talking about on my website. Let me just hit refresh. Someone was texting me saying they couldn't find it, but I know it's there because I'm seeing it. This is what I call the tiny home triple header. I'm doing a Create Your Dream Tiny Home Masterclass from 3 to 4 p.m., a tiny home investing class from 4 to 5, and then the Thea open house. They're all on the same link. So just click on sign me up, and then you'll be taken, make sure, you'll be taken to this page, and you'll be getting that link and information to join us for the open house. And then by then, we will definitely have that membership link fixed and figured out. I don't know why that wasn't working. So maybe I'll just try a different page. So hopefully that really helps with people. You know, there's a lot to get informed on, but that advocacy is so key to really learn. Yeah, we don't see it there. So sorry, guys, the link will come back in action. All right, let's see what, oh, there's a whole toilet talk going on. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, more likely than not, if you're going to legalize your tiny home, you're going to want a standard flush toilet. It's just part of the water requirement of a tiny home. For us, you know, under the radar people, yeah, having a compost. And what Alexis talked about earlier, she takes it to the landfill. That's exactly what we did traveling around the country for 6,000 miles. But when you want to actually legalize and get it permitted, you know, there's this whole stigma around trailers and mobile homes of the past. And we really need to do a branding changeover. And that's really what a mixture of tiny house villages and just tiny homes in backyards, aesthetically pleasing. That's really what the not in my backyarders are kind of, you know, opposing. So it's meeting some people halfway, but with those pesky wheels that can be covered with decks and you name it. So I actually visited the very first tiny home in San Luis Obispo. That was the first one in the state of California to be legalized. Now we just heard from Nick that there's another one and then another one. So it's happening. The ripple is here.
And also, I mean, one of the questions that Nick reiterated is what's the biggest pushback I get from local governments? And most of the time is we don't want RVs in our backyard or we don't want RVs. And that's why it's so important to, one, explain to them that they can write a definition in their ordinance that makes sure that these typical or conventional RVs are not movable tiny houses, that they look like and act like and smell like and taste like a real live tiny house. They just happen to be on wheels. And that's very important. And the second, the biggest, the staff folks that are most difficult usually to work with are your building code officials. Usually planners, they like to try to do different things and work with you on kinds of things. The building code officials see things in black or white. It's either in their code or it's not in their code. And so that takes a great deal of work and training and education to educate them on the various codes that they can use and potentially even supplement to make sure they get a quality unit that they feel comfortable, that's safe and habitable in their community. They don't want to see a fire happen and someone get killed because, you know, it puts them and their municipality at risk. So that's very important. Can't stress enough the importance of education. And by far, the biggest educational tool there is get the elected officials out to your shops. Have them, if you can't get them to the shop, park one in front of City Hall during council day and invite them to come out and look at it. There's a lot of things you can do to get them interested and involved in the units, because once you're in them, you gotta love them.
Absolutely. In fact, I had a number of elected officials coming through my tiny home because we traveled so much. So it doesn't have to just be builders, but obviously if you're in an area and you're a builder, please, if you're